Honestly, this is probably scarier to me than a horror movie. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what we're about here at the Horror Movie Syllabus, but in short, we take a look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we talk about 3 movies from that subgenre. Today's subgenre is horror movies about science and medicine. And this is a particularly interesting subgenre in general and a particularly fun one for me specifically. And I'll explain. Science and medicine is a repeated theme that you'll see throughout horror in general. The mad scientist idea is something of a horror movie trope, if you will. So with that understanding, you could see how a lot of different kinds of movies would fit into the science and medicine subgenre. So in an effort to draw a fence around it or set some parameters for what's going to qualify for this subgenre, basically what I was looking at were movies that the science and medicine was a major part of the story, like a major plot point or a major theme in the movie. And where it was fairly obvious that when you think of the movie, you think of the science or the medicine as a big part of the movie. It's not just a character or a scene, but rather a major piece of the movie, something that would be inextricably intertwined with the movie when you think of it. In all honesty, this will probably become pretty evident as we go through the movies. You'll see what I'm talking about. But that said, don't feel like, you have to conform to what I'm saying here. Like I said, the subgenre can be interpreted very broadly. And if you want to put different kinds of movies in there, put different kind of movies in there. I chose what I chose because I thought that helped justify it and maybe make it a little bit harder for me to fill out this subgenre. That said, I didn't really have any problems because there's a lot of great movies that still fit the bill, even when you put these parameters around it. Now, I did mention that I particularly like these kinds of movies, and that's because, fun fact about the professor, I don't like doctors and hospitals. I guess I don't know if there's I'm sure there's a name for a phobia about it, but I don't do well with those kind of situations. So this taps into something a little bit special for me. These movies tend to work for me a little bit more than maybe the average person would. So I tend to really appreciate these kinds of movies. They tickle me in a way that is pretty distressing sometimes. So they work on me. This is a subgenre that hits for me. So mileage may vary on that, but for me, I tend to like these movies. I also think that they're very intellectual. I think that they really make your mind work and examine the possibilities and really spark the imagination. I like those kind of movies as well. So this is a sweet spot subgenre for me, and I think you'll see from how much I like the movies that we're going to talk about. This is I don't know if I go as far as say one of my favorites, but this is definitely one I like quite a bit. Now, as usual, we put the movies into order of undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level. And in this case, that's going to indicate the order of their reputation. So as we go on, the movies will have a better and better reputation. So with that, let's go ahead and examine these movies. The first movie that we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is Flatliners. Flatliners came out in 1990 and was very popular at the time, in no small part because they had a cast full of, at the time, hot upcoming actors. And I remember, I was the right age for this. It was, I was a teenager and it really hit pretty well with, again, with a great cast and kind of a spooky topic and everything. But I'm not sure if this movie's held up all that well, but we'll get into it. If you haven't seen the movie, it's about 5 medical students who decide to start doing some off-the-books experiments with death, specifically where they literally kill themselves and experience what they think would be the afterlife for a brief period of time before then being resurrected, brought back by their med student compatriots. And then they can report back what they saw while they were, while they were flatlined, if you will. And of course, because it's a horror movie, hijinks abound with their experiment. But we won't go any farther than that so as to not spoil it for you. But Flatliners is a fun movie. or at least it was a fun movie. I really did dig at the time that it had this amazing cast, led off by Julia Roberts, who at the time was not Julia Roberts. She was, ingenue Julia Roberts. And you also had Kiefer Sutherland, who was like the coolest dude in the world at the time. You had one of the Baldwin brothers, not the best one, but you had William Baldwin. You had Oliver Platt, and of course Kevin Bacon. That's a great solid cast of actors that was very popular at the time and got teenagers like me hyped to see this movie. It's an interesting thing because that cast made this a rather mainstream movie, not to mention the fact that it was directed by Joel Schumacher, more on that in a second. So it had that kind of hipness to it that appealed to young people more so than, a lot of the other movies we've talked about that came out at the time that were a little more niche, a little bit more, focused on just the horror fans. This one was meant to be, more broad appeal, and it had that broad appeal. It was a hit. Now, like I said, it was directed by Joel Schumacher, and at the time, Joel Schumacher is the bee's knees. He's made the Lost Boys at this point. This is post Lost Boys, but it's pre Batman movies. So he's very much in vogue, very much in favor. He hasn't become a movie pariah yet. So all of the ingredients are here. It's got a budget. It's got a big studio behind it. Everything's here for it to be a success, and it was. And it's a good movie. Don't let my hesitation about the datedness of it, dissuade you from it. It's a solid movie. It's just not as good as I remembered it being. At the time, I'm probably 15 years old when I saw this movie, and I just thought it was incredibly deep and important. I thought that it had all these existential ideas that it was exploring, about, the afterlife and God and what does all that mean and what does death mean and how people confront it. And I thought that was all fascinating and deep. As a grown up, I watch that now and I see that it's a really pretty surface level. It's not really as deep as it's trying to be, and that's okay. Because what it's really trying to do is give you a ride. And on that, I think it largely succeeds. I do wish it had a little bit more to say about death. I really wish it would have explored that a little bit more intently. And, some of the other movies that we've talked about recently, movies like, say, Jacob's Ladder, really kind of went there in a way that Flatliners kind of stopped short of doing. And again, it's trying to be a little bit more mainstream and it's trying to be, a little bit more fun. So I can see why they didn't go there, but it would have benefited the movie to do that. It probably would have aged a little bit better too, because the cool star power in this movie isn't really carrying it anymore. With the exception of Julia Roberts, arguably, maybe Kevin Bacon, nobody really cares that much about these actors anymore. They're not super exciting. In fact, I'd say Gen Z probably wouldn't even recognize most of them. So that's not really going to get you by anymore. And as for the thrills in the movie, that's debatable. The movie's got a lot of scenes that take place in the afterlife, and the whole idea is these people are kind of now haunted by the things that they see in the afterlife that are tied to things in their past. It's a fine concept, this kind of idea about regret and the past coming back to haunt you quite literally. It's a fine idea. It doesn't always lend itself to the scariest, filmmaking in the world. It's got some decent visuals, and it's got some interesting interpretations of the afterlife, but it doesn't really say a lot. And it doesn't really spook you that much. I would be surprised if people were freaked out by this movie. I think it's a little bit more interesting that it has this, philosophical and scientific angle to it. The idea of exploring death. That's a great concept, but it doesn't go far enough in that, like I was saying, and it also isn't that scary. And this is what I'm saying when I say I would revisit this movie and it didn't hold up quite as well. It's not that the movie's bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that 15-year-old me loved this movie. 46-year-old me still likes it, but it's not a favorite or anything like that. Now, they did do a remake of it that I haven't bothered to see yet. It starred Elliot Page and a few other people. And I'm not even sure if it's a sequel or a remake. I think it's like a reboot or whatever they call it now, the requel or whatever, where it's technically a sequel, but it's basically telling you the same story. And that's fine. And maybe the visuals are better. I don't know. I should probably check it out, but the reviews were horrible about it, and so I didn't really feel a need to revisit it. I was actually reluctant to revisit the original because I was afraid that it wouldn't hold up as well to me, and that wound up being true. But I'd still say it's worth being on the syllabus. It may be a little bit of a time capsule for me personally, but I still think it scratches that itch of, just trying to find something interesting in science, the experiments that they're doing about death, and that concept is strong. And it sounds like the remake or whatever, the new one, didn't do anything more with it than the original did, which is a shame. It would be nice to see somebody take that concept and really really run with it. But it's a fine enough movie. I still have love for it, like that nostalgia love for it. And that honestly may be influencing a bit why it made the cut, but I can't help it. Like I still love those actors. So Flatlanders gets a pass for me. It gets on the syllabus, and it's definitely worth your time. I don't think you'd be upset that you saw it. You may wonder what the big deal was when it came out in 1990, but it's definitely not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, and I still have affection for it even after even though it doesn't really hit me as well as it did back then. If you've got thoughts on Flatlanders, if you've seen it, let us know in the comments below what you think of it, especially if you've seen the new one. I'd like to know what your thoughts are about that. Is it worth my time? Should I go ahead and check it out anyways? And of course, if you haven't seen it, give it a chance and let me know what you think of it. The next movie that we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is The Autopsy of Jane Doe. The Autopsy of Jane Doe came out in 2016 and is something of a pretty strong cult hit. I don't think it really hit all that big when it was released. It kind of came and went, but it really found its audience after the fact. And people who've seen the movie seem to really, really enjoy it. And I'm definitely one of those people. If you're not familiar with the movie, it's about a father and son coroner team that get brought a body from a crime scene that and they have to perform an autopsy on it. And the autopsy is revealing strange things. It's very hard to figure out exactly what has happened to this woman, and because the forensic evidence is not really adding up. It's not really making sense, and strange things start to happen the deeper they get into this mystery. And I'll go ahead and I'll stop there because this is one that you definitely don't want to spoil for people if they haven't seen it. And it goes into some pretty neat and interesting places that I don't even want to tell you too much and give you too much to know going into it. So let's go ahead and cut it off there. But I will say this much. The Autopsy of Jane Doe lived up to the reputation. I came to it a little bit late in the game. I definitely didn't see it when it came out, and I only saw it a few years ago. And I'd heard a lot of people buzzing about, oh, that's a really good movie. It's a really good movie, underrated. They were right. Absolutely right. It's an underrated movie. Now, where we'll start with that is the director, Andre Avradal, who, if the name sounds familiar to you, he's the guy who directed Troll Hunter and the recent Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that Guillermo del Toro produced. The guy's got a good eye. He makes good movies. His movies are really compelling. I haven't seen everything he's done, obviously, but I've liked everything that I've seen quite a bit. So you've got a director with a really great eye, with a really good, strong sense of what he wants to do, sense of style, a sense of mood and tone at the helm. And that's already, a big feather in your cap right off the bat. Then you add Emile Hirsch and Brian Cox, two underrated yet excellent actors. And you've got the recipe for something kind of special. The movie has this mystery at the core of it, this Jane Doe that's come into the coroner's office, and they're trying to figure out what happened to her. And it's very compelling. Now, you know me, I love a good mystery, and I thought this was a very good one. And it's not really spoiling too much to tell you that there are supernatural elements to this at foot. So, when it comes to mysteries, when you throw supernatural in with the mystery, it kind of throws it off a little bit because you can't necessarily solve for supernatural. You can't, look at the evidence and say, "Oh, well, clearly that's this. It's a ghost. It's a monster." That's not where the logical mind leaps. So in terms of solving the mystery, it's a little bit of a challenge, and yet that didn't bother me in this movie. I was still fully engrossed in the mystery, even though I knew it was going somewhere supernatural. I was just there for the ride, and it's a great ride. Now, this movie's got a lot of subtext going on underneath it too. You've got, this idea of, the father-son relationship versus the son and his girlfriend's relationship, and this idea of, him working in the family business and stuff like that. So there's a lot of drama laced into there that's set up at the beginning that I don't know if it fully pays off, but at least it helped me invest in the characters. I felt connected to them. I liked them. So when things start going sideways, I was engaged. I was really, I was invested in these people. I wanted them to survive. I liked them. And I always think that's a key part of the movie, of a horror movie, the successful horror movie, is that you like the characters and you want to see them be okay. I also think that there's some other underlying themes here, themes about history and feminism. I don't want to get too much into it because again, I don't want to spoil it. Uh, but the movie has some interesting things to say, and it's definitely not a message movie. It's not beating you over the head with anything like that. But if you want to look at this from a slightly different angle, you can see some different, deeper things going on in here. I just talked about Flatliners and how it kind of falls short and gives a very surface level exploration into its subject matter. This one, I think, doesn't spell anything out for you at all, but there's deeper readings to it if you want them to be there. And so I think it's a much more successful movie in that regard. Once again, the movie has some great visuals. It has some uncomfortable scenes, especially, if, things like autopsies and stuff like that bother you. It's not super gory. There's some gore in there, and there's some disturbing things in terms of physicality that may be a little off-putting to some people. But it's not as gory as you might think it might be from the title. But that said, the effects that they've done are very effective. They look great. This movie looks great. Like Andre Overdahl, like he really knows what he's doing behind the camera. And I should probably check out more of his work because, like I said, everything I've seen of his, I've liked quite a bit. All this adds up to a movie that is living up to its reputation as an underrated gem, something that not enough people have seen, not enough people have appreciated. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check this movie out. And I'd say the less you know about it going in, the better. I think what I've told you is more than enough than what you need to know to see if you'd like it or not. But if you haven't seen it, of course, check it out. Let me know what you think of it. And if you have seen it, let me know. Do you like this movie as much as I do? I have never met anybody who doesn't seem to be really into it. So if you're not into it, let me know in the comments below what is about it falls short for you. Because I'd be curious to hear. But Autopsy of Jane Doe, it's a high recommend for me. And our last movie selection today, the postgraduate level selection, is David Cronenberg's The Fly. The Fly came out in 1986 and is arguably a bona fide horror classic, deeply disturbing, gruesome, brilliant, and I absolutely love it, and I am not alone. There are a lot of people, a lot of fans for this movie who absolutely adore it, and for good reason because this movie is absolutely amazing and quite the trip. If you haven't seen it, the movie is about a young scientist played by Jeff Goldblum who is experimenting with teleportation. He's built two pods and you can teleport from one pod to another. And he's testing this out. Gina Davis plays a reporter who's interested in his story and wants to report on it. Unfortunately, he decides a little prematurely to test it early on himself and teleport himself and inadvertently mixes his DNA with that of a fly. And hijinks abound after that. And oh boy, do the hijinks abound after that. But we're not going to try to spoil it too much because this is a movie that needs to be seen to be believed. The first thing that should have drawn you in is when I described it as David Cronenberg's The Fly. We've not talked about Cronenberg that much, but we've started to talk about him a little bit on the channel, and I guarantee you we will be talking about him a lot more in the future. But Cronenberg is a master of horror. He is a brilliant director who does some amazing, challenging, thought-provoking, and stomach-churning things in his movies. You can always count on him to deliver. He's basically known for his body horror, and I would say that The Fly is potentially the quintessential David Cronenberg body horror film, and maybe one of the quintessential body horror films ever. But you'll notice I didn't put it in the body horror subgenre. And that was a tough decision for me. I didn't do that, but that's because I really wanted to talk about the fact that this is how important the science is to this movie. Yes, the body horror is what everybody remembers on this, but the science of this movie is absolutely fascinating, and I think it gets a little overshadowed because of the body horror, which is phenomenal. Jeff Goldblum in the role that made him famous, arguably. I say that with a little trepidation because I'm not positive about that. I know he had he had a name before this. He was billed, and I know he got a start in Death Wish. So he's been around for a while, but this is the first movie that I remember Jeff Goldblum, and I just was like, okay, I'm a fan of this guy. And Gina Davis, an underrated actress who has always been good and never quite had the career that I thought she would have. The two of them have so much chemistry, and they're so good that it's what gives this movie a lot of heart because it's going to go into some insane, gross places. but you're going to stick with it because of the pathos, because of the relationships, because these two actors made you care, even though what you've got is an arrogant, reckless scientist and a professionally suspect journalist. You're still on their side, and I think that's because of the charisma of the actors. When things start to go south in the movie, and they go to south fairly quickly, it's shocking. Watching the physical transformation of Jeff Goldblum from man to man fly, Brundlefly as they call him because his character's name is Seth Brundle, it's a harrowing thing to watch. It's so gruesome. The practical effects are so realistic and stomach churning and disturbing and effective. And when I see this movie, I'm a kid, I'm like 11, 12 years old, whatever. And I ate this thing up. I absolutely loved it. It was so gross. But again, because it's also a really, really cool movie. Now, it is based on the 1957 Vincent Price movie, the same name, and there was a series of Vincent Price movies. I've seen the first one, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I don't think I've seen the sequels. If I do, I don't remember them very well. But that original source material is also really good. But what David Cronenberg does with it is his own thing. And again, it's the body horror in particular, something you really couldn't have done in the 50s. That it just gives it a whole different spin. Both these movies are excellent. Both these movies stand on their own. This is one of the best remakes you'll ever see. And yes, I could have put this in the remake subgenre as well. But again, the reason I want it is because it's the science and medicine aspect of it that really I feel needs to get a light shined on it. It's something that I think really probably shines in the original a little bit better because it doesn't have the body horror overshadowing it. But this idea of Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, and his obsession with his experiment, with the science of teleportation, and his desire to see it work out, not only because it would change the world in a way that would revolutionize everything, and frankly, side note, probably would destroy our economy virtually overnight. But that's a whole other discussion. Um, Watching his obsession with it, though, not only because of what it could mean, the impact it could have on humanity, but also the fame that it would lead to for him is absolutely fascinating. The arrogant doctor, the arrogant scientist is something that I find very, very interesting in movies. And this is one of the best examples of it. Also, the technology and the way it works, a little ahead of its time in the sense that, in 1986, we're still learning about things like DNA. We're not really, at least the general public, not super clued in on how this works and stuff. And the movie really, even now, I feel like the science is relatively sound. There's logic behind it. I know that there's exploration into teleportation as we speak. And I hope that everybody who's doing that watches this movie and goes, maybe we need to take a step back and think about this because, as a wise man once said, you'd get too busy thinking about whether or not you could do something and you don't stop to think about whether or not you should. But the movie's themes about science and self-experimentation really resonate for me. And like I said, they do get overshadowed by the incredible gore effects and the pathetic story, the sad tragedy of the movie. That the science maybe gets overshadowed a little bit, and it shouldn't because it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal idea. It's realized very, very well, and also very stylishly. Thank you, Cronenberg. And it all comes together to make an absolute brilliant, brilliant film that does have the great reputation it deserves. If you haven't seen it, you do have to see it. It's part of your horror education. You must see it. Do you need to see the sequel that starred Eric Stoltz? Not really. I know it has its fans, and it's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not Cronenberg doing it, and it doesn't hit the same way. It just doesn't. It's partly because you've kind of seen it before, and partly because it just doesn't have it doesn't dare to go into the same places as the original did. It doesn't have that same. I don't know. The ingredients just didn't come together the same way for me. It doesn't really hit the same way. Not a bad movie. Not it's probably worth your time, but not a must see. But the original is. The original is a must see. And for some people who don't have a strong stomach, a strong constitution, maybe it's not for you, but I kind of feel like you have to see it anyways. It's that good. It's that good of a movie that you might have to power through and see it anyways. But you better than I know you, so you decide for yourself. But if you haven't seen it and you think you can take it, watch The Fly and let us know what you think because, oh man, to see somebody experience that for the first time, pretty sweet. And of course, anybody who has a dissenting opinion on The Fly, let us know in the comments. But I'm going to bet that everybody here who's seen The Fly loves The Fly. And recognizes how great it is. So let's talk about it more in the comments below. But The Fly, bona fide classic, highest of recommends from Professor Victor. You gotta check it out. So that's going to do it for our exploration into science and medicine horror films. But if you like these kind of movies like I do, I've got a few extra credit movies that you might want to check out as well. The first movie I'm going to talk about is a movie called Splice. And Splice came out in 2009 and is a movie that has its fans and it has a little bit of reputation, but kind of goes under the radar quite a bit. And it's too bad because this movie is deeply disturbing and far darker than anybody would think it would be if you'd heard about it and didn't see it. If you're not familiar with it, the movie stars Adrian Brody and one of my favorites, Sarah Polley, as a couple who are also scientists who are exploring using DNA to basically create a new organism. And they succeed in a way they weren't really expecting. And they create basically for lack of a better way of putting it, like an alien human hybrid that they name and kind of take as a child. But things don't go very well. And we'll leave it there in case you haven't seen it, because I wouldn't want to spoil it for you. But the movie is fascinating. Once again, science and medicine is very front and center on this. The experiments that they're doing and the science that they're challenging is very fascinating. It's a big part of the movie, both in terms of what they can achieve and also in terms of the marketing of it, which is a fascinating angle to the movie that I liked very much. But where it really shines is, first of all, in the effects. The creature that they create is awesome looking. It's really, really cool. It's a pretty good blend of CG that's held up fairly well and practical effects that work really, really well. And it winds up being the centerpiece of the movie. The acting is top notch. The two actors that are their leads are giving the great performances. Sarah Polley in particular is always good, and she's great here. The way that they vacillate between being scientists and also feeling kind of parental towards their experiment is a fascinating thing, and it's a big part of the crux of the movie, and it leads to the absolutely disturbing ending that I will not spoil for you here. But suffice to say, it's very taboo. It's a very taboo ending, and I think that a lot of people don't realize that about this movie. I don't think it really, to their credit, it hasn't been spoiled a lot, but I think a lot of people don't realize just how taboo this movie gets. It's got a particularly unsettling ending that is just absolutely bizarre, really hard to get your head around, and kind of gross. Like, they're kind of skeevy. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. So buckle up for that if you haven't seen this movie and if you're not familiar with it. It's gonna go into some really dark, uncomfortable places at the end, but it's a really fun ride. It's a really well-made movie. It's an underrated film. I like it quite a bit. There's a lot of people that do, but it's not the romp that you think it is. It goes into some pretty unexpected places. The next extra credit movie I'm going to talk about is a movie called Pathology. And Pathology came out in 2008 and is a fun movie that is very underrated. I hardly hear anybody ever talking about this movie, and I like it quite a bit. This movie caught me by surprise. It looked like it was going to be kind of a throwaway film, but I actually thought it was really, really good. If you're not familiar with it, if you haven't seen it, the movie stars Milo Ventimiglia as a medical resident who goes to a new hospital and meets a bunch of other cocky, arrogant doctors who are trying to challenge each other to come up with the perfect murder by actually committing murders and trying to see if they can stump the other doctors, the other pathologists, from figuring out how they did it. Obviously, I won't go any further than that so as to not spoil the movie for you, but this movie is a tremendous amount of fun. It really delves into the competitive nature of doctors and the power and control that they have with their education and their knowledge and their access to things. It really leans into that aspect of it. It's something that I don't think gets explored enough in movies, frankly. It also really focused on, fun kills, like really clever ways to kill people, convoluted ways to kill people, interesting things like that, hits a sweet spot for me. It's not exactly a slasher movie per se, but it's got a little bit of slasher spirit in it, which resonated for me rather well. Also has Alyssa Milano in it, although she's criminally underused in the movie, but we here at the Horror Movie Syllabus love Alyssa Milano, so that's always a plus. The cast overall is largely quite good. Like I said, a lot of the pathologists in the movie they're kind of jerks. They're unlikable, but they do it really, really well. And it all comes together rather nicely. The movie has a lot to say that I don't think it necessarily accomplishes that. If it's trying to be say something, if it's trying to say something important, I don't think it's really quite succeeding, but it is succeeding at having a good time. And I had a really good time with it. So if you haven't seen Pathology, I would definitely recommend it to you. It's a fun ride. It's a little bit gross, and it goes into some kind of ridiculous things at the end, which to me is just adds to the fun. But I definitely think it's worth your time, and it's one that definitely doesn't get enough love. People don't really talk about this movie, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. And if you have seen it, let me know what you think. Am I overselling it, or is it as good as I say it is? Let us know in the comments below. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Antiviral. And Antiviral came out in 2012 and it is quite a trip of a movie. It is unexpected and kind of brilliant in terms of idea and concept. Maybe not 100% crushing it in terms of execution, but we'll get into that. But if you haven't seen it, the movie stars Caleb Landry Jones as a guy who works at a company where they infect regular people for a price with viruses that have been extracted from celebrities so that these fans of the celebrities can experience what it was like to have the literal same virus that infected their favorite celebrity. It's a really interesting concept. And of course, I won't go too much farther into it because I don't want to spoil it for you. But suffice to say, the movie is really stylish, really clever, really interesting idea. Again, I'm not 100% sure that it nails the landing. You know, it doesn't stick the ending quite as well as maybe I would like. But it doesn't really matter because it's a really gorgeous movie. It's directed by Brandon Cronenberg, son of David Cronenberg. And I fear that Brandon Cronenberg is going to be compared too much to his father. And that would be a disservice to him because he's kind of his own guy. And I haven't seen all of his movies yet, but I like what I've seen so far. He's definitely got his own strong voice. He directs with the confidence that you don't see from an early filmmaker quite so often. This is one of his first movies, and it's really competently directed. And he's kind of the opposite of his father in a way because he's very stylistic, and the look of his movies are definitely, or at least this movie is definitely cleaner and more like surreal and stylish and stylized. That's the word I'm looking for. It's stylized in a way that David Cronenberg doesn't really do. His is a little bit more grittier, dirtier. And so there's a marked difference in their styles right off the bat. That said, Brandon Cronenberg does kind of tap into that body horror that his dad does so well in the movie, but nowhere near to the same extreme. Where it really shines is the concept. The concept of celeb culture gone amok. You know, people's fascination with celebrities going so far as to inject themselves with a virus so they can experience the same illness that their favorite celebrities had, is utterly bizarre and sadly way too realistic. I could see this being an actual thing that would catch on, and that's distressing. Side note, because I like this kind of stuff in terms of copyright law and things like that. The idea of like the patents and everything that would go into protecting these different viruses and the subplot that has to do with that was absolutely fascinating to me. I actually love that quite a bit. Where the movie falls a little short to me is narratively, it doesn't quite go far enough, or it doesn't quite wind up in a place that really was satisfying. It wasn't bad. I wasn't disappointed by any stretch of the imagination. I like this movie quite a bit. I just felt like it left something on the table, and I'm struggling to articulate what it was. There was something about this movie that fell a little short, and I feel like it was with the narrative. I felt like I wanted it to go somewhere that it didn't go, but I'm not sure where that was. I felt like it stopped a little short of being great, but it's really good. And so if you haven't seen it, I would definitely check it out. I recommend it to you. But if you've seen Antiviral, let me know. Do you have the same feeling I have about it? Do you feel like it fell just slightly short? And are you able to pinpoint what it is about it that didn't really quite make the mark? Because I feel like it's darn near excellent, but it's not excellent. So let me know if you have thoughts on that. Let me know if you can pinpoint what it is about Antiviral that's not hitting for me, that's missing the mark just slightly. But overall, it's definitely worth your time. It's very interesting to see what Brandon Cronenberg's doing, and I expect really good things from him. So that's going to do it for the science and medicine subgenre. I hope you've enjoyed the journey we've taken through all of this. I really like these movies quite a bit. They hit for me, like I said, for personal reasons, but I also think that they have mainstream appeal, that they could work for just about anybody because they're really good movies. And now it's time for that part of the video where I answer a horror trivia question on camera to see if I can answer it from the Horror Trivia Pursuit. This is something, as you know, if you've been watching the videos, that I like to do at the end of every video. Take a question from the Horror Trivia Pursuit and answer it live and see if I can get it. Now, this is This is the psychological. This is the psychological category. And the question is, at 7 p.m., on what date does the annual Purge commence in the Purge series from 2013 to 2018? Whew. I don't know this. I've seen all the Purge movies, but I don't think I've ever noted what day that is. I don't know why. Like, I have an idea of a date that jumps in my mind, and I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's right. Um, I don't know what this is. Um, and I know because you get on social media and people be like, "Oh, it's Purge Day," and I've seen that, but I don't remember the day. Like I've never. This is not something that I've managed to like lock into my memory. Now, mind you, I'm the guy who's terrible about remembering things like birthdays, and I tend to not notice when holidays are coming up. I'm bad when it comes to calendar dates. It's not my thing. I just don't care, frankly. So this is not the easiest question for me. This is kind of hitting me in a weak spot. So I'm going to answer. Sometime I'm going to take a guess, and we'll see what happens. But I have two thoughts on this, and again, I've kind of stalled a little bit to give you guys a chance to come up with an answer for yourselves. But we've stalled enough here. I have two thoughts on this. One thought is that it's in March, like March 8th or something like that. But I'm not going to go with that. I'm going to go with what my first gut reaction was, even though I'm 90% sure that it's wrong. And that's April 15th, which in the US is tax day. And I don't know why that should jump to mind is April 15th. And I'm almost positive it's wrong. I'm almost positive it doesn't align with tax day. That doesn't really make any sense. But I'm going to go with that. I'm saying April 15th, even though like March was really rattling around my head. It's like making more sense. Both of these might be way off. Like I said, I'm really just taking a shot in the dark at this point. So let's take a look and see what is the real answer. March 21st. So my instincts about it being in March were correct. That was something that was true. March 21st, but tax day was flat out wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I decided to trust my gut. My gut lets me down on these things a lot of the times. It's kind of embarrassing. March 21st. Did you get March 21st right? Do you celebrate Purge Day? Do you go and do something on Purge Day that maybe you shouldn't be doing? I don't know. I hope that doesn't become a thing because that's awful. Anyways, well, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you had a good time. I had a good time hanging out with you guys. Had a good time talking about these movies. Let's continue the discussion down in the comments below. And until next week, class dismissed.